Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode Home Soil. Another half-decent episode where the crew meet a brand new form of life that wants to kill them all. Don't forget those spoilers, otherwise enjoy. The Enterprise is checking up on a group of terraformers, and after repeated attempts by Picard to give them a call, a chap called Director Mandel finally responds. He reassures Picard that though they're a bit behind schedule, all is well and that they really don't need to bother themselves with a checkup. But Troy is immediately suspicious and tells Picard that Mandel is fearful and hiding something, though in true Troy fashion can't tell him anything specific. So despite more protests from Mandel that they're really too busy for guests right now, Picard insists that they're coming whether he likes it or not and tells him to prepare to receive their away team. On the surface, Riker and company are greeted by a monotone-sounding woman called Louisa Kim and introduces her colleagues Mallinson and Benson. She apologises for the director's rude behaviour, explaining that their terraforming efforts are in a critical phase and that he's usually quite charming. Riker says not to worry and wants to know more about the kind of work that they're doing, so she excitedly begins to explain in the most boring monotone fashion the entire terraforming process to them. Data is impressed with their hydraulic systems and Mallinson thanks him but mentions they've been having some erratic power surges, but is quickly cut off by Benson. Director Mandel then walks in and apologises for his earlier behaviour and appears to be charming enough before telling Mallinson to get back to the hydraulic chamber right now to get it fixed. He seems a bit sullen about this and Troy looks concerned, but no comment is made and he heads off. Mandel proceeds to give us some more dry technical details about the terraforming process before Troy suddenly warns Riker that Mallinson is in trouble. They run over but find the door is jammed and all we can hear are desperate screams and explosions. Eventually everything goes quiet, the door finally opens and Mallinson is a smoking wreck, so after safely powering the room down they collect Mallinson and everyone but Data, LaForge and Benson beam back up to the ship. Data remarks that it seems the laser drill behaves with a life of its own, but no one is sure why, so he asks LaForge to restore power to the room so he can test out his theory. LaForge complies and Data is immediately targeted by the laser. Once again the door is jammed and we hear a bunch of explosions, but eventually the door opens and through the haze Data emerges unscathed, though the laser drill is now a smoking wreck much to Benson's dismay. Data explains that the firing program of the laser was dynamic and adjusted to its tactics, as if it was being controlled intelligently. Back on the ship, Data briefs Picard on what just happened, but Director Mandel thinks it's just a load of bollocks and tells Picard he has no right to interfere with his business. But instead, Picard invites him to fuck off back to his quarters and has Yar escort him there. Data resumes his report and explains he's certain that the laser drill was reprogrammed, which would have required the talents of some genius programmer. Picard wonders why one of the terraformers would go to such lengths in order to hide something, so tells them to return to the planet to keep digging for any clues, and gets Yar to work with Troy in digging deep into the profiles of the three remaining scientists to see if they can find out who done it. Back on the planet, Data and LaForge continue their investigations when they suddenly find some kind of small blinking light down one of the drill shafts. LaForge takes a good look at it with his visor and can't make heads or tails of it, and Data wonders if it's some kind of life form, though LaForge thinks that's rubbish because whatever it is, it's completely inorganic. So they take it aboard the ship for further examination. The crew are trying to determine if this thing is indeed a life form and run through a series of basic tests. Although the computer says it's inorganic and not a life form, a magnified image shows an intricate looking structure and then a weird high-pitched sound starts occurring. They reduce magnification and step away from it and the high-pitched whine reduces in intensity, clearly responding to the crew's presence. After making some more theories and deductions, Dr. Beverly runs it through the computer again and the only conclusion it can come to is that this is indeed a life form of some kind. In the ready room, Director Mandel is scoffing at the idea of this supposed life form, but Picard doesn't buy it and implies that Mandel might be so obsessed with his work he'd kill for it, but Mandel takes great offence to that implication and storms out. Troy says he definitely knew about the life form but was genuinely upset at the suggestion of murder, meaning he most likely was not responsible for the death of Mallinson, even though Yar says he does have the necessary skills to reprogram the laser drill. Back in the lab, Dr. Beverly has called Picard down as LaForge reports something is happening with the life form's internal structure. The high-pitched hum returns and suddenly there's a blinding flash of light which reveals there are now two blinking lights instead of one. It seems whatever it is has replicated itself, thus continuing to prove that it is some kind of life form as it's able to reproduce. Dr. Beverly tries to activate a quarantine field around the jar and tells everyone to evacuate the room as a precaution, and just as they do, the computer receives a translation request, so it seems that not only is this thing a life form, but it seems to be an intelligent one. On the bridge, Worf has reinforced the quarantine field, but it seems the life form has started to take control of the lab, and while the crew work on trying to get a look at what's going on inside, Picard goes to the conference room to confront Mandel and the remaining terraformers. Mandel tries to obfuscate, but Picard cuts right through his bullshit, and Mandel finally admits that he did indeed know about the life form, but didn't consider it as such, thinking it was just some sort of cool crystal with strange energy fluctuations. Benson then further elaborates that when they first arrived the sand had a strange sparkle to it, and then as they later built the station, geometric shapes started forming and disappearing in the sand, but again they didn't even think something was intelligent behind it. Meanwhile, the life form has multiplied again and it seems to be expanding its power as the quarantine field starts to fail. Finally, the universal translator is able to pick up what it's saying, and the life form, calling everyone ugly giant bags of mostly water, demands they leave, that they tried to communicate earlier but no one listened, with several of their kind dying in the process, so they started fighting back, killing Mallinson. Picard and company try to reassure that they come in peace, but the lifeform's patience has run out and declares that they are in a state of war with them now, and promptly cuts off the call. It starts exerting more of its power, causing the ship to shake about, and it seems the ship is now at risk of being destroyed. After a while, the microbrain, as the crew have now started calling it, seems to calm down and it appears to be in a resting state before its next reproductive cycle. So Picard tries to get it beamed back to the surface, but to no avail, and it seems the microbrain has now managed to take control of the ship's computers, preventing any further direct action against it. Another conference discussion later, we find out more info on what the terraformers were up to that may have caused all this upset in the first place, when the microbrain once again replicates, destroying the containment jar, and instead of a small cluster of blinking lights, is now a large glowing crystal. Data in the Forge managed to determine though that it seems to be feeding itself from infrared light sources, so Picard tells them to cut the lights in the lab to try and starve it of energy. This seems to do the trick, and the microbrain immediately begs them to put the lights back on. Picard says he will only if they agree to peace, and that he'll even send them back home. It agrees and tells them that if they come back in a few hundred years, they might be willing to talk to them again one day. So they beam it back to the surface, Picard enacts a quarantine of the planet to prevent anyone else from visiting, and the ship heads off to its next adventure. So here's yet another episode that riffs off TOS, this time from an episode called The Devil in the Dark. Only instead of a terraforming station, it was a mining station that had a non-carbon based life form, where the people there had started unintentionally killing creatures called the Horta, not realising they were actually sentient life forms, though to be fair it was more the eggs of the Horta they were killing. The crew actually make a big fuss over the inorganic nature of the microbrain, as if this is something completely new and outside anything Starfleet has encountered before, when only just a few episodes ago they encountered a giant crystal-based life form, not to mention the historical contact with the aforementioned Horta. I did however quite like the concept of this particular life form, as it felt very strange and alien, if you can get past the crew acting towards some blinking lights in a jar. It's also a rare example in this case of the Enterprise actually fulfilling its mandate of seeking out new forms of life, albeit in this case more like stumbling across it. This episode is also a lot more hard sci-fi than most Trek episodes ever tend to be, and I like that the crew for the most part were correctly applying the scientific method, as they attempted to analyse and understand what they were looking at. They spend a great deal of time on this, in fact, with whole scenes dedicated to them asking questions, theorising, eliminating possibilities, and proving. It's not exactly riveting viewing, there's a lot of technical stuff here and it's rather dry at times, but I appreciated nonetheless this more intellectual approach to solving the puzzle, and hints at TNG's future of being that far more intellectual show than TOS ever was. As far as Season 1 concepts go, the microbrain itself is, I think, generally a well realised one. Yes, it's cheap looking, TNG had a very shoestring budget for its first season, it's why we keep seeing that same damn studio set popping up for example. But I think it works quite well to sell its unique nature, though I'd say when it turns from blinking lights into a glowing crystal it goes a little too far for me. I was less enthused by it eventually talking to the crew with its broken English. I think this would have been much better if it communicated less verbosely, either via the computer or some other visual method. The episode even makes mention how the microbrain tried to communicate with the terraformers before by making geometric shapes in the sand, and that would have been quite cool to see. It is however responsible for the line, "ugly giant bags of mostly water," sticking with me all these years as a descriptor for us fleshy human beings. I think the episode does have some structural problems though. It heavily misdirects us at the start, with Director Mandel apparently trying to hide something and being very afraid of someone poking into what they're doing. But they never really follow through on this initial fear and paranoia, and towards the end it's revealed that though they were aware of the strange properties of these silicon crystals, they had no idea it was a life form, so I was just left wondering why was Mandel so afraid of them coming to visit in the first place. It also seems the episode wanted to be this murder whodunit mystery in the first half before pretty much forgetting about that in the second half as it focuses on the microbrain instead. I wonder perhaps though if the scientists, which are portrayed here as very obsessed types bent on achieving their goals, simply didn't look that deeply into it, fearing what it might reveal. It's a very common human flaw after all, of ignoring what's right in front of us when it's an inconvenience to our goals or worldviews. But I think too much time was wasted on the murder mystery angle, and I also think too long was spent on giving us the dry specifics of how the terraforming process worked, going into far too much technical detail about their equipment. Which brings me to the guest stars of this episode. Director Mandel is played by the late Walter Gotell, who might be best remembered as General Gogol in several of the James Bond films, and is by far the most engaging of the scientists, and generally comes across well as a stubborn scientist annoyed by the constant interruptions to his work. He's not the most sympathetic of sorts, but he does realise his mistakes and accept them towards the end. However, far less can be said of his fellow scientists. Benson and Mallinson are just there, and made no impact on me at all. But Louisa Kim, played by Elizabeth Lindsay, is just terrible, delivering her lines in the most monotone, bored voice you could imagine, as if she's made absolutely no effort in her delivery at all. This could be a result of ADR dubbing, something that often happens in older shows, and it can be harder to replicate an emotional performance this way when you're not playing off the other actors or sets directly. But she gets the next most screen time to the other scientists here, and I just wanted her to go away every single time she was on. I mean, there's just no charm or charisma there at all. About the only time she rises out of this was in her quarters when Riker comes in to comfort her. For a moment she actually feels like a character, but then later on it's back to wooden, monotone acting. Incidentally, that particular scene is another waste of time and accomplishes nothing in moving the plot forward in any way. As for the crew, there's little really to say here beyond what I've already covered. It was nice to see them methodically work the problem, as well as see their excitement at finding such a unique lifeform, and even made smart use of Troy and Yar in putting together psychological and security profiles of the other scientists when the episode is in whodunit mode. Poor Yar. I pretty much never get to talk about her, and when I do it's little more than a throwaway comment. But even so, it's nice to be able to at least make a comment about an otherwise completely non-existent character. Don't worry though, we'll soon get to talk quite a lot about her. Overall then, a fairly competent episode with a good concept and a somewhat meandering plot before getting to the meat of it. Like the last episode, it's not a particularly memorable one, but it's definitely worth the watch, and again it's a step above the overall quality of your average Season 1 episode. Next time, Picard comes under investigation and Wesley attempts to take his entrance exams into Starfleet Academy, in the episode Coming of Age. Please feel free to leave any comments or feedback, and if you liked this episode then please do like, subscribe and share. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.